Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Today, the co-host is Chris Rossini. He is also the editor of the RonPaulLibertyReport.com. And Chris, this is the day we do Mythbusters, so what do you have? Do you have a couple myths that we ought to discuss today?
Yeah, I'm very happy with the topics today, and let's get started with, we'll talk about private property and voluntary trade. Now, these two things are the bedrock of a peaceful and prosperous civilization. The more private property and voluntary trade that exists, the better off we are, and it's a sliding scale all the way down to North Korea, Cuba, etc. With that being said, we have presidential candidates who view trade a little bit differently. Like Donald Trump, he always is talking about beating China, beating Japan, how we're going to beat them. Now, that doesn't sound like private property or voluntary trade. Can you please address this, Dr. Paul?
Well, yes, this is something that is absolutely bewildering that he's coming up with this, but he obviously has calculated and has found that there's an audience out there. And I think there's an audience out there that he can beat up on China because people are hurting, they don't have their jobs, and he doesn't want to accuse United States policies. He doesn't want to look inward. He has to put blame on somebody else. That's like an individual. When an individual has a problem, frequently say they blame somebody else caused the problem. It's never because they didn't work hard enough or something like that. So yes, he wants to blame China, and it's going over very well, and he's going to bring jobs back because of this. But first, he has to beat up on China and put the blame on it and said that they're dumping all their junk products in this country. But he never stops to think, well, why are they dumping it here? Are the Americans buying it? Yeah, the Americans love it. They go to Walmart and they get cheap products, so it's been a blessing in many ways to help the poor people survive these bad times that we have. And so he wants to put a 45% tax on that. Completely wrong. He believes that one side always wins in trade. But just like on voluntary individual transaction as well as trade, both sides are supposed to win. If you and I have an agreement and we're selling something, the person who gets the money for it and the other one gets the product, both people should be happy. And that's the way free trade should be. Both should benefit. And the truth is, in spite of the many shortcomings with our monetary system, since we started trading with China, things have worked out rather well. In some ways, we have had tremendous artificial benefits from it. Instead of complaining that they're beating up on it, we have been able to export all our excesses, inflation. We get to print the reserve currency of the world, and we get people in countries like China to take our paper money and sell us goods. So it compensates for our ineptness in running our own economy. So we get a free ride in doing this. But the other thing that happens under these circumstances is that we print the money and we send it overseas, and we get cheap products, which is obviously one of the reasons why jobs go overseas, because we're importing products. But the other benefit is China, for instance, will monetize it. That they'll print yuan and they inflate their currency, and then they get bubbles, and of course they're going through the correction of their bubble. But what do they do with the dollars? They don't burn the dollars. It's like Trump thinks, well, if they get the money, they're just going to sit on it. How can China buy anything from us or anybody else? How can they churn this money and make the economies go, the global economies work? Because they can't buy a thing from us if we don't buy something from them. So this whole thing that if he stops it, stops the trade, that is going to be an automatic benefit, and it's an automatic disaster because, if he raises tariffs, even if it's less than 45%, they're going to do the same thing. What happens to our imports? Our imports crash, their exports crash, and then the people get unhappy. Trade wars lead to currency wars. The currency wars are ongoing, and then the bitterness comes out, and right now, I think what Trump is contributing to is the bitterness and finding scapegoats and blaming foreigners. And it's those Mexicans, those terrible people, they're selling us stuff and they shouldn't sell it to us so cheap, and jobs are all going down there. Never look and say, the problem is the way our currency system is set up, the way the Fed is set up, the way the regulations are there, the taxations, All these things make us non-competitive. We're not competitive in labor because we subsidize the unemployment of many people. So wages, are higher than they can get overseas. So therefore, they look for cheaper products. But the market is always demanding the lowest price for everything. In a free market, the consumer is in charge, not the economic planners and not the politicians. Now, there is one thing that Trump says we get some bad deals when we go into these multilateral agreements like NAFTA and WTO. I agree with that. We shouldn't even be in those because they're designed for the special interests. They're designed for special corporations, and we gave up our sovereignty on that. But if we had totally free markets where we could compete and we had a healthy economy, believe me, this would be a tremendous benefit. The founders understood this. They said that the more free trade, the better off we'll be, and the less wars that we would have to fight. And certainly in my lifetime, and I especially remember the opening up the trade doors with China, things are so much better off. In high school, the Chinese and the Americans were killing each other. Today we're competing with each other to each other's benefit. But the one thing I mentioned that people forget about is China has retaliated by spending that money back here and buying our debt and keeping the system going. Indirectly or immediately, that's a benefit. Indirectly, it is part of the bubble system. I mean, they have facilitated this, but that's all they can do with the currency. It has to be spent back here. So in many ways, the more we buy over there, they won't burn up the dollars. The dollars have to come back here. There's always a balance of payments. It doesn't mean that it'll be measured directly with the United States and China. Maybe China will buy something in South America, and South Americans will use the dollars to buy from here. But it always has to balance out. But eventually it comes to an end, and I think guys like Trump and others sense there's a problem, but they're coming up with the wrong answers. It's not to destroy trade and promote protectionism. That will only make it much worse. So in a free trade or free transactions in a free market, both sides benefit. And that is something a lot of people don't understand. So if they think it's beneficial to one side and not the other, that is truly a myth that has been repudiated years and years ago. It's so strange that somebody would come up, but it's because people are frightened and scared and want somebody to do something, anything, just do something, that they are susceptible because nobody is out there really explaining how the market works and saying that, yes, there's a lot we could do, but it takes doing less interference and less regulation and less manipulation of our currency and less Federal Reserve inflationism. That would do a lot more to facilitate trade than anything like putting on huge tariffs, which are always paid for by the country that put on the tariffs. So put on those tariffs, the people in this country suffer the most because they'll pay higher for the goods.
Yes, protectionism and tariffs are like shooting yourself in the foot, right. And we should always avoid them. Along with private property and voluntary trade, it's very important to be able to transfer property efficiently from where it's needed least to where it's desired most, and that's where stock markets come in and why they're very valuable. However, in this day and age, Wall Street, and it's greatly deserved, is very hated. But it's important to not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Dr. Paul, is Wall Street inherently evil, or is its marriage with the government and the Federal Reserve the real evil?
Well, the real myth is that those who believe in socialism and welfareism and corporatism think that it's inherently evil, and it isn't. The markets are very necessary. You need to sort out the prices, but one thing that is sorted out in the markets would be interest rates. But the pricing mechanism is key to it. And the stock market and commodity markets, that does a lot of sorting out. There's a lot of people taking risks. They're looking to the future. The future markets play an important role. And they provide a tremendous benefit to tell us value of companies. But today we don't have that, so it becomes more of a nuisance and a menace and is justification for condemning Wall Street. But Wall Street has been wedded to government, and I blame Ronald Reagan for some of this, because when the stock market crashed in 1987, this made Wall Street very nervous, so he created by an executive order the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, which was also nicknamed the Plunge Protection Team, which has been designed and has done quite well to try to prevent serious long-term plunges in the stock market. Even yesterday, when the Fed promised they wouldn't raise interest rates nearly as much as they promised, they might only make a token twice this year of raising 0.25%. So the Fed is always involved protecting Wall Street, and of course the stocks go up when they do that, and especially it's designed where people's stocks go up, the executives make more money, and this further separates the average person, the middle class, from the wealthy people on Wall Street. But there's a big difference between getting wealthy because you're in bed with the government and you have protection and you have special deals and you're in the military industrial complex or the banking system, versus somebody, and it still even exists today in spite of all our problems, when a company goes out and they bow, to the consumer's wills, and that company would get wealthy because the consumer votes them success. And I think it's fair to talk a little bit about Apple, because Apple's a very wealthy company, and they have accommodated the people when they say the government's not protecting my privacy, they're threatening to invade my privacy. Ed Snowden has explained it to us. We want a cell phone that's very secret. And he can make a lot of money satisfying the consumer. But it wasn't, an evil to the consumer. It was the government that is unhappy about this. But too often people are careless when they blame Wall Street, and they just say anybody that makes money, the rich people are bad people, and they're the ones who took the money from the middle class. You can't have the destruction of the middle class, and you can't have a class of very, very wealthy people without a central bank that literally destroys the purchasing power of money. Because when that happens, especially in the early stages until there's runaway inflation, it serves the interest of the wealthy by transferring wealth, because they get to use the money first. In the middle class, they lose their jobs and the prices go up, and they have a lot more inflation than the government will admit to. So it is easily understood why they blame, Wall Street. But it is very important to have a pricing structure, not only on stocks, but all goods and services. But probably the most important price is the price of money, and that is interest rates. And that's where the monopolistic Federal Reserve comes in and say, we will decide exactly what interest rates will be, and they cause all the trouble. But then there's always somebody who's going to benefit from it, because the low interest rates keeps the machine going along, allows government to spend longer, and this is especially detrimental when you have the reserve currency of the world. So there's still a lot of people benefiting from this. Anybody who's getting a check from the government, anybody in the military industrial complex, they have all the benefits from this, and yet we see the shrinking, angry middle class going on, and it's very easy to demagogue it and say, well, it's just because the Wall Streeters are making all this money, it's the 1%ers, and people have to be careful and separate that. But it's also opened the door for a candidate to get major crowds out and say, well, I'm a socialist. In the true sense of the word, he's a very strong Keynesian economist and big government person, not pure socialism, but he can use the term, and it's very popular. So this is very disturbing that the American people are rallying around the term socialism as a reaction to crony capitalism. And I want to have them consider something else, and that is free markets and sound money. That would be a lot better option for all of us.
Yes. Unfortunately, many of us learn these things from government schools. Most of us are forced to go to government schools, and we learn a lot of myths that when we're older, you find out, if you're lucky, that they aren't true. So we'll cover that next, and we'll talk about the Supreme Court. Supposedly, we're taught at a young age that it's above politics. We elect these people for life. They're above politics. They're there, to uphold the Constitution, which they do not do. And we have Hillary Clinton flat out saying quote, "The balance of the Supreme Court hinges on this election." Now, it doesn't sound like it's above politics to me. What do you think, Dr. Paul?
I think it always involves politics. You'd think it should be less involved, even less so than the statement that says the Federal Reserve is above politics, which they aren't. But the Federal Reserve chairman is always looking to be reappointed or something, so they do play politics. And their influence, they get their jobs because the financial industries, promote them and they accept them. So I think the whole thing is that Hillary is saying that they're above, that they're above politics. They're not, and they're very much involved. And I think about John Roberts. Yes, there's political influence, and some of it's legitimate. If you're a conservative president, you might appoint a conservative justice. But the unfortunate part is that politics still play a role. Just think of how John Roberts, who was supposed to be the conservative, ended up supporting Obama's Obamacare, and getting him out of hock and saving it, I think, on 2 occasions. So that's pure politics, and they sense it. I think the justices sense what the people are thinking, and they accommodate. And I think of one person that comes close to rejecting the political influence, and that's Clarence Thomas. Yes, he's a conservative, but he's a conservative libertarian type, and he defied, the court and Roberts and others when they rule in favor of the drug laws and the drug rules, and he's taken a position against it. So in a way, he resisted that public perceptions and public political pressures put on individuals. So yes, they're not above politics, and it's a shame. They thought maybe if they didn't have to be reappointed or brought up for election, they'd be more independent. But just getting there is a political maneuver. The elections are important. And you can just look at this empty seat right now on what they're going through, the arguments back and forth on what they should do. So it is indeed a myth that it's a nonpartisan position and they're appointed in a nonpartisan faction. That's pure fiction.
Right. Finally, Dr. Paul, we'll enter the world of the bizarre now. There are 2 presidential candidates, Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, who have hitched their wagon to the ideas of a man named Frank Gaffney. Now, Cruz came out and said that he's getting foreign policy advice from Gaffney. And Gaffney is known for his anti-Islam stances, but they're really far out there. For example, he claims that there are members of Muslim Brotherhood infiltrating our government, and that there is, quote, creeping Sharia law, that we should be worried that Islamic law is making its way into American courts. Dr. Paul, can you please dispel this myth?
Well, if it ever happens that way, I'd have to say America's done for, because it's so bizarre and so extreme that means the people went along with it because it would be out in the open. So I think that is indeed a myth. But along with Gaffney, also Michael Ledeen and Elliot Abrams has gone along with being an advisor of Cruz. And they're not even accepted by the run-of-the-mill neocons that are so extreme. So that tells you something about what's going on. Now, Trump, he did admit that he took some advice and was close to Gaffney. But now the latest name that he has used is Giuliani. And I think, oh, yeah, Giuliani, I remember him. He and I think, had a little debate about foreign policy. So I'm very disappointed. My feelings are hurt that Trump didn't call me and ask me about my foreign policy. But he decided to go and get Giuliani's opinion. So whether it's Cruz or Trump, they're very much into the neoconservatism, and they are extreme. But they have to be extreme if even the average neocons get rid of them or don't want to deal with them. But this idea that Sharia law will come and they plan to do that is pretty much over the top. I worry about not the infiltrations of Sharia law where they come in and people say, oh, that's where if you get caught stealing a loaf of bread, your hand gets cut off and that sort of thing. Well, that's not coming. But what I worry about is what is ongoing, and that is the infiltration of the socialistic, welfareistic rulings of the court right now. Because if you have anything economically and property rights, we never win those arguments. And if there's a debate in the Supreme Court ever, on monetary policy, it's the inflationists that generally win. So I think it's the fact that welfareism and Keynesianism and regulations and monetary functions, all these have been so detrimental and they're always held up by the courts. So that, to me, it's an ongoing process, and that'll only change when we change the entire culture of the country, where we find out that the people really want to live in a free society and not a regulated society, and they're not looking for a bigger boss to run and tell them what to do, and they're looking for a more peaceful foreign policy where the courts don't support the illegal wars that we fight overseas. So there's a lot going wrong and an infiltration into our court system, but I don't think people should lie awake at night thinking that Sharia law will come tomorrow and the punishment for robbery is going to dramatically change. So these are the issues that I think are crucial, and I think if people realize this, they will look more carefully, at the election that's going on. Even though I'm pessimistic, I do not think the elections will sort this all out, because they're not even talking about the real issues. They're talking about these side issues and forgetting about it, because it becomes personality fights and demagoguing and a misunderstanding of economics, and still the acceptance of so many myths that have been portrayed for so long. But Chris, I want to thank you for being with us today and joining us and helping us out on Mythbusters.
My pleasure. Thanks, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And I would like to thank all the viewers today for tuning in, and please come back soon.